Emma's hand trembled slightly as she pushed open the towering glass doors, the sound of her daughter's tiny sneakers tapping against the marble floor echoing far too loudly in her ears. She had dressed as best she could in a neat but worn blouse and pressed trousers, praying no one would notice the frayed edges. This interview meant everything. It wasn't just about a job, it was about stability, dignity, and proving to herself that she could provide more than just scraps for little Lily. But as fate would have it, her sitter had cancelled at the last moment, leaving her with no option but to bring Lily along. She tried to tell herself it would be fine, that people would understand, but deep down she feared they wouldn't. Lily clutched her mother's hand tightly, whispering in her sweet, innocent voice, "Mommy, will they like me?" Emma smiled faintly, hiding the weight pressing down on her chest. "Of course, sweetheart, you just stay close to me." The receptionist raised her eyebrows the moment they approached, eyes flicking down to the child before returning with a forced smile. Emma ignored the look, signed her name on the sheet, and sat down. Every tick of the clock tightened the knot in her stomach. She had prepared for every possible question about her skills, her past experience, her goals, yet she had not prepared for the judgment she now felt piercing her skin from strangers' eyes. Lily sat quietly beside her, coloring in a small notebook Emma had brought to keep her busy, unaware of the silent storm brewing around them. When her name was finally called, Emma rose, her knees weak but her grip on Lily steady. The panel of interviewers sat around a polished wooden table, their faces already cold and analytical. She introduced herself politely, trying to mask the nervous quiver in her voice. But as Lily peeked shyly from behind her, one of the men immediately frowned. "You brought your child?" he asked, disbelief dripping from his tone. Emma's throat tightened. She quickly explained how her childcare had fallen through, how she didn't want to miss the opportunity, but her words seemed to fall flat. Another manager muttered something about professionalism, and a woman in a blazer shook her head slightly, scribbling notes. The weight of their silent judgment grew heavier with every second. Emma spoke about her skills, her experience, her determination, but their eyes were no longer on her. They were on the small girl sitting quietly, swinging her legs under the chair. At last, the lead interviewer leaned back, his expression firm. "We appreciate your effort," he said curtly, "but you are not a fit for our company culture." The words stabbed into Emma's chest, leaving her breathless. She stood slowly, humiliation burning in her veins, and took Lily's hand once more. She held her head high, fighting the tears threatening to spill, whispering only to herself, "Not in front of her. Never in front of her." Emma's fingers brushed against the cold steel of the door handle as she prepared to leave, her daughter's hand warm but trembling in her grasp. The sting of rejection pressed heavily against her chest, like a stone she couldn't shake off. She had promised herself to stay strong, yet in that moment she wanted to crumble. Before she could take a step forward, the door swung open from the other side, and in walked a man whose presence seemed to shift the very air in the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features softened only by the confidence in his stride, he entered with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to announce who he was. The panel of interviewers immediately straightened in their seats, their hushed greetings confirming what Emma suspected. This was Donovan Hayes, the CEO himself. His eyes swept across the room, lingering first on the interviewers, then moving toward Emma and the small girl half hidden behind her. "What's happening here?" His voice was calm yet carried a weight that demanded honesty. One of the managers cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, the candidate brought her child to the interview. It was disruptive to the professionalism we expect." He spoke as though explaining something obvious, his tone almost defensive. Donovan's eyes narrowed slightly, though his face revealed little. He shifted his gaze back to Emma. For a brief second, her carefully held composure cracked. She opened her mouth, ready to apologize for bringing Lily, ready to take blame once more just to soften the harshness in the room. But before she could speak, Lily took a small step forward. She reached into her little notebook and pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper filled with bright colors and uneven shapes. Holding it out with both hands, she whispered softly, "This is for you." The room froze. Emma's heart nearly stopped as she watched, horrified that her daughter might have crossed some invisible line of decorum. But instead of brushing her off, Donovan knelt down slowly, taking the drawing as though it were the most important document ever handed to him. He studied it, a faint smile tugging at his lips before he looked at Lily. "You made this for me?" he asked gently. She nodded shyly. "Thank you, it's beautiful." When he rose to his full height, his eyes found the panel again. His voice, though calm, cut through the air like steel. "Tell me," he said slowly, "which of you here has ever managed to balance ambition, responsibility, and sacrifice the way this woman clearly does?" She didn't miss this interview. She didn't make excuses. She came, with her child, because giving up wasn't an option. That is strength. That is commitment. The panel shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier authority crumbling under the weight of his words. Emma stood frozen, stunned, her daughter's small hand clinging tightly to hers, unaware that in this moment, everything had just begun to change. Emma stood there, unable to process what had just happened, her breath caught in her throat as though the air itself had become too heavy to draw in. She had braced herself for yet another humiliation, for another door slammed shut in her face, but instead, this man, the very CEO she had only read about in news articles, was looking at her with something entirely different in his eyes. Respect, understanding, something she hadn't seen in years. Donovan Hayes turned his full attention back to her, ignoring the panel that suddenly seemed small and insignificant. "Emma," he said with quiet certainty, "you're hired." For a moment, her mind refused to accept his words. "Hired," she echoed, her voice faint, trembling with disbelief. Donovan nodded once, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Yes, not despite the fact that you brought your child, but because you did. That tells me more about your character than any resume could. It shows me you don't quit. You fight for what matters. And that's exactly the kind of person I want in this company." Emma's lips parted, but no words came. She felt Lily tug at her hand, looking up with wide eyes. "Mommy, did you get the job?" she asked innocently. That simple question broke the dam inside Emma, and for the first time in years, tears streamed down her face, not from defeat, but from relief. She nodded quickly, dropping to her knees to hug her daughter tightly. "Yes, baby, Mommy got the job." Her shoulders shook as she whispered those words, overwhelmed by a flood of gratitude. Donovan watched them silently for a moment before speaking again. "You'll start in a position where you can grow. I want you to have a chance to prove yourself. And know this company will always have room for people with both ambition and heart." His gaze flicked briefly to the panel, his voice cooling. "Something some of us here clearly forgot." The interviewers lowered their eyes, ashamed, knowing their dismissal had just been overturned by the one voice that mattered most. As Emma stood again, she felt taller than she had when she walked in, as though something within her had finally shifted. The rejection that had threatened to crush her moments ago now seemed like nothing more than a stepping stone towards something greater. She extended her hand toward Donovan, her voice still unsteady but filled with genuine resolve. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." He shook her hand firmly. "On the contrary," he replied with a faint smile, "I know exactly what it means." As they walked out of the room, Lily skipping beside her, Emma realized she had entered the building carrying nothing but hope and fear. Now she was leaving with something far more powerful, a future. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that everything was finally going to be okay.